Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson,
investigative reporter Brian Chasnoff.
We're 1 week away from the beginning of early voting in the San Antonio mayoral and city council races. And last week, there was a poll released done by Fairfax, KSAT, and the San Antonio Report. And it had some interesting numbers on the mayor's race involving Ron Nirenberg and former councilman Greg Brockhouse. You'll remember 2 years ago, they ran against each other. It went to a runoff. Brockhouse lost by only 2% to Nirenberg. But the new poll has Nirenberg at 56%, Brockhouse at 21%. And I want to get. I'll start with you, Greg. Just how surprised are you? Or are you surprised by this poll? And do you think the numbers are close? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I without really knowing very much about Fairfax methodology, I mean, it strikes me as totally plausible. I mean, I think these are probably pretty good poll numbers, and they make sense to me. I mean, it's kind of like we've talked about over several episodes now that, Brockhouse doesn't really, it's not entirely clear why he's in the race. I mean, what is the argument he's making? It is a radically different situation that Nirenberg is in this year, from 2 years ago. And, obviously that has everything to do with the pandemic and his response to it. And again, I think he's done, he's managed, the mayor's office really well in the pandemic. That doesn't mean that, 2 years from now, he could, he might be in trouble again, because, he's not the strongest mayor we've ever seen. I mean, he's got a lot of flaws. It just so happens that his strengths really, they linked up with kind of the crisis the public health crisis we've been in over the last year. Once that eases and, San Antonio returns to normal, more or less, I think his weaknesses are going to, they're going to come to the surface again. I mean, he has a hard time articulating a vision for the city. I've never been entirely convinced that he has a kind of a cogent vision for where he wants to take this city. And he definitely has a hard time, bringing council along with him in kind of a non-crisis situation. He doesn't talk to a lot of
I was thinking about comparing him to compare him to Joaquin Castro. I think Julian Castro. I think that's an interesting point because he not only had probably about 8 council members pretty much like lined up behind him from the very beginning. But he also very early on talked about this is the decade of downtown. And basically we got to fight sprawl. We got to start pulling people back into the urban core. That was that was a clear vision. Everything I'm doing is about that. And I think that's a really good point. Brian, what do you make of the poll? Are you surprised at all by it?
I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is Trump supporters tend to line up with Brockhouse supporters, and Trump supporters can be tough to find in polls, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
I mean support for Trump has been underestimated in the past,
absolutely.
But that raises another point that Trump is arguably a fading political entity right now, and I think Brockhouse kind of lashed himself to the Trump movement in a lot of ways when he ran a couple of years ago. Yeah. Anti-politician, gonna break stuff and a very sort of anti-city hall stance.
Sure.
So I don't know how much that is resonating right now with voters on the north side who might have supported Trump before he lost to Biden. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's valid. I do think you got a point about, Trump tended to outperform poll numbers. Like if you had asked me, 2 weeks ago how I thought the race was going, just not based on anything, but just a gut feeling, I would have probably said maybe 50-30 Nuremberg. I definitely had the feeling that this kind of race he's run where he's not engaging Brockhouse very much is made it hard for Brockhouse to really get traction. And so I thought that we probably had a pretty good differential there, but the size of it did surprise me somewhat. Josh, what did you make of it?
You know, the thing that makes me scratch my head at all of this is, you know, you've got this mayor's race that's been kind of sleepy over, you know, this whole cycle. And, you know, the most controversial thing on the ballot is Prop B, which is the measure to take away collective bargaining from the police officers union. You know, if that drives a wave of folks to come out in support of the police union to vote no against that, you know, I can't see a whole lot of you know, voters who are passionate about that then going and saying vote for Nuremberg. You know, I think Brockhouse benefits from that wave. Yeah. But, you know, I mean, the other thing looking at this poll is, you know, you've got, you know, 19, 20% undecideds. Mm-hmm. And, you know, even if Brockhouse picks up every single one of those and these numbers hold and they're accurate, he doesn't close that gap with the mayor enough to force him to a runoff. Yeah. You talked about Proposition B, and there have been some interesting developments in that same poll that we were talking about. The results for Proposition B, which would, if passed, would basically remove take collective bargaining away from the San Antonio Police Union. And in the poll, 39% were opposed to it, 34% supported it, which was maybe a little closer than some people would have expected. And while Ron Nuremberg has stayed out of the fray on that one, as we're doing the podcast on this Monday morning, a former mayor, Julian Castro, has released a video in which he comes out for Proposition B and basically says that you know, he supports good faith negotiating, but that the system is broken in San Antonio with the police union, and that we need this proposition. So, you know, Josh, how much if the race is as close as that poll indicated, and you have Julian Castro entering in and saying not simply that we've had problems with the police union, but that Proposition B is the remedy for that. How big a factor is that? You know, I'm not really sure about that. You know, my gut tells me, yeah, I mean, first off, I think it's a pretty interesting journey that Julian's been on. You know, these past several years, you know, since he left the mayorship, you know, he was, you know, as I understand it, he had pretty good relations with the police union at the time, and you know, has gone on sort of like this evolution to where, you know, he's you know, one of the only, you know, major presidential candidates or one of the only, you know, Democratic candidates in the presidential primary that's really talking about police reform. So, I mean, this felt like a pretty natural extension of that. Mm-hmm. But as far as, you know, sort of, you know, bolstering enthusiasm for Prop B, I'm not sure. I mean, yeah. I think you've got a couple things going on here that sort of muddy the waters for people, which like kind of, if you're in that center basically and you support collective bargaining rights, but you want to see police reform, this is something that kind of tests your loyalties if you're playing in that sphere. I mean, you saw it with the Central Labor Council coming out against Prop B and saying, you know, we're going to keep collective bargaining rights. So I don't know if this makes it easier for people to make that decision.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that the challenge, I don't necessarily think the police union has run a real, I think they've struggled to find their message on this. I mean, they've tried to say this is defunding the police, which is not really what's happening here. They've also, suggested that the opposition Fix SAPD is, they've employed dirty tactics and so on. I think that if it's closer than it is, I think than we thought it was going to be. I think it might have to do with some failures. I think even people that I've talked to who support the police union on this have privately told me that they don't think they've necessarily run a great campaign. But the Castro, go ahead.
And the other thing that we should. I was surprised, based on their past the police union PAC's campaign finance filing for this past cycle between like late February and late March. They'd only spent like $43K. Which the Fix SAPD spending just dwarfs that, and their fundraising dwarfs that as well. So I'm fairly confused about what's going on here. I mean, are they basically capitalizing on a lot of pro police sentiment that's already out there? How much of a campaign do they actually have to run on that?
Yeah.
Still, I mean, this is an existential threat for the union. Absolutely. I mean, it is. Their level of spending is kind of surprising to me. And I mean, it seems like they've been running kind of a scattershot, disorganized campaign from what I've seen, which is, that's surprising to me. I mean, just think back, during the late Scully years, just, 4, 5, 6 years ago, when they were, they were trying to work out a contract, and it just became like this political campaign that was focused on Cheryl Scully. You don't see that kind of discipline now, which is strange to me.
Well, Mike Kelly, the president of the union, has left. I don't know if that's
it. Yeah, you had to change there. And one of the interesting things too, Greg, is like that period that you're talking about. I mean, the people the person who was behind a lot of the messaging from the police union was Greg Brockhouse.
Right.
I mean, he was getting paid by the union. So it's like a weird thing where he can't, as a mayoral, I think he's trying to run a more statesman-like campaign than he ran 2 years ago anyway. So he can't really get, in the dirt the way the union did a few years ago. Yeah. And so it's kind of a weird thing. Like he would really benefit from a stronger union campaign, but they probably would be running a stronger campaign if he was helping them with it. So it's just this weird dynamic.
By the way, that actually, I mean, this is a little off point, but I mean, that kind of got me thinking about, 2 years ago, another thing Brockhouse had to run against was Cheryl Scully, who, she's gone now. So that's another big hole for Brockhouse. I mean, he beat up on her.
The wedge issues aren't there.
Yeah. I mean, at times it looked like he was running against Cheryl Scully, not Ron Nirenberg 2 years ago.
Well, something I was also thinking about is like how much of this is indicative of sort of like this broader sort of, I guess you could call it maybe a reset that the union is going through, and is that arriving at sort of an awkward time. Danny Diaz is not the bomb thrower that Mike Kelly was. He seems to be trying to play nice to a certain degree with city leadership. That meeting between him and Nuremberg a couple of weeks back was cordial by all accounts. So how much of it's just odd. I would say it's probably odd timing for this sort of existential threat to be taking place while they're just fundamentally, shifting gears.
Yeah. And I would say that, in Diaz's meeting with Nuremberg a few weeks ago, I mean, I would just guess that like really what they want is for, if the mayor isn't going to, fight Prop B, then at least not talk about it, just keep a low profile, not make it a campaign issue, definitely not weigh in, on its behalf. I think they just want to, if he's not going to fight it, then just keep him quiet, I think is probably the strategy.
Yeah. Wanted to talk a little bit about a visit that we had to San Antonio last week from Governor Greg Abbott. He visited Freeman Coliseum, which has been used as a shelter for unaccompanied migrant children coming from Central America. And the governor was outside of the Coliseum. He had not yet entered or taken a tour of it, and had this press conference and said, we need to shut it down. There had been allegations of sexual assault at the shelter, and said this is all due to the terrible policies of Joe Biden. Unsurprisingly, you've had pushback from Democrats. You had Congressman Joaquin Castro visiting last Friday with some other Democrats, and you had State Representative Trey Martinez-Fisher saying that Abbott was engaging in Piñata politics. So, Brian, you wrote about the allegations that the governor has put out there. I mean, what have you found so far?
Well, I think the most relevant finding was something that Abbott actually attached to a letter he wrote to Vice President Kamala Harris, again, repeating his demands to shut down this temporary facility that's federally run, but out of the Bexar County-owned Freeman Coliseum. To his letter to Vice President Harris, he attached a memo from two state officials from the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services and the Health and Human Services. And they detailed the three complaints that came in last week. And nowhere in those complaints was there an allegation of sexual assault. There were allegations of, quote, sexual acting out by these teenage boys who were at the facility. There was a complaint that some of the children, quote, who may be homosexual, end quote, were being bullied. But there was no actual allegation of sexual assault. So the clear conclusion from that is that the governor likely exaggerated the complaints.
Yeah,
when he appeared in front of Freeman Coliseum.
There's so many things about this, and truthfully, I think that when you talk about what turns people off in politics, and this I think is a great example. You had the governor with an opportunity to take a tour of the facility, to ask all questions that he had about it. And after he has the press conference, he did take a tour, and Bexar County Commissioner Rebecca Clay Flores, who's been volunteering there, was with him and said he did ask questions along the way. It would have made all the sense in the world for him to do this beforehand. One of the things that he threw out at his press conference was the possibility that kids who were infected with COVID-19 were being mixed in with other kids who didn't have it. By all accounts, that does not seem to be anywhere close to the truth. And people, as he was getting toured the facility, were showing him where everyone is being kept, and those who had COVID were being kept in a separate place. So he was throwing a lot of stuff out there. And one of the things he did too was in calling for this to be shut down. I don't think he had any suggestions for where else these unaccompanied kids ought to be put. The other thing is that he did an interview on Sunday with Chris Wallace on Fox News, where Chris Wallace pointed out that during the Trump administration, there were allegations of, many allegations of sexual assault at facilities where migrants were being held, and Greg Abbott never spoke once about it. And the final thing I would say is that he supported a Remain in Mexico policy instituted by Trump in 2019, which it required migrants seeking asylum, including unaccompanied children, to stay on the Mexican side of the border while their claims were being processed. So this means that you had unaccompanied children basically having to camp out, living a homeless existence on the Mexican side of the border, where they were subject to attacks, assault, certainly the elements. And he supported that policy and never said a word about it. But he wants to see a facility, a shelter that was set up here to try to provide some kind of a place for these kids while the process is playing out. He wants that to be shut down. And I'll say that, if there are allegations of, if instances of bullying or any just poor management at the facility, these should be taken seriously. But for him to have this big press conference before he even went in there, I'm just kind of dumbfounded by the whole thing. I mean, anybody else have any thoughts?
And one of the well, real quick, I'll let y'all talk too. But one of the other complaints was that they weren't being fed enough.
Right. And
that was debunked very swiftly and definitively by, like you said, Commissioner Clay Flores and County Judge Nelson Wolf. These kids there were 3 local catering companies that are, have been activated in there, and they're feeding them 3 meals a day and 2 snacks. So I don't know, these were just complaints that came in, and it's unclear who made the complaints.
Yeah.
But as you said, it did seem premature for the governor to appear and make these, hold this news conference before he even toured the facility.
It almost makes me think that he engages in politics like unmoored by facts.
Yeah, if you didn't know better, you might think that.
Yeah, I might think it's just a game to him. That this is just naked partisanship, and we don't really need any kind of factual substance to what we say in public. It's all about scoring points.
Yeah, fortunately, we know that that's not the case, so that's encouraging.
Yeah. He's an honorable governor, truly.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap things up, we got a little bit of time, and Greg, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the mayor's speech, the State of the City speech last Friday. For the chamber groups, and he talked about he was pretty optimistic about where things are going now that people are getting vaccinated. Where things are going with the economy, and he predicted like a really robust improvement in the tourism industry for San Antonio. What's your sense about that?
Yeah, I mean, his tone kind of surprised me. It's kind of like, well, if he's saying go about living your life, just wear a mask. It's like, oh my God, this might almost be over. I think if you spend any time in downtown San Antonio, especially over the weekends, I mean, at least in-state travelers are here. Like they are coming back. I don't think there's any question about that. Really, and he did touch on this in the speech. The tourism, like the backbone of the city's tourism industry, are conventions, right? I mean, and those were decimated. Almost all of them were scrapped last year. So yeah, I mean, I got to think they are coming. They are coming back. But you have to keep in mind. I mean, it's not like an organization can say, you know what, I'm going to have a convention next weekend. I mean, these are planned months, in some cases, in many cases, actually, a year or two in advance. So, I mean, we're still, we're going to be in a transitional period where, I think by the end of the year, you'll see, conventions are slowly coming back. And then will they be back in full force in 2022? I mean, I don't know. The opinion, at least among, convention planners, seems kind of mixed on that. But you're definitely going to see more of a resurgence by the end of this year. So you take business, convention business that you've had almost none of, and you start to bring it back, and you couple that with in-state travelers. And yeah, I mean, I think he's right. Like, I think the hospitality industry in San Antonio is poised for a comeback.
Wow.
But it's not going to be, it's not going to be fully restored for a year or so, probably at least.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up there. Hope you all are doing well. And thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. Take care.